But this wasn't my first skeleton. The first had been at another house under what I hoped was a very different set of circumstances, but I had not forgotten the trouble that had accompanied those bones. I looked down at the skeleton, briefly toying with the idea of covering it up again and pretending it had never happened. Was it better to let sleeping bones lie? Unfortunately, my conscience pricked me, whispering that it wasn't the right thing to do. Also, if I were truly being honest with myself, I was curious. My good friend Fergus had got into my head with all of his conspiracy theories. This certainly wasn't the gold coffin-encased Roman vampire he'd hoped to find on my property, but it could still be something. Even though I was far from being a conspiracy nut, recent events had forced me to accept that there were many truths that were kept hidden from the casual observer, some that lurked right beneath everyone's noses. At least the cause of death would not be a mystery this time. I'd scraped away as much dirt as I thought I could get away with to confirm that this really definitely was a body, before I'd need to stop and call the police. My efforts had uncovered the skull that accompanied the bones. There was a hole in the centre of the skull's forehead. I was no expert when it came to forensics, but I didn't need to be. It had been caused by a bullet. It was simply too neat to be anything else. I felt my mouth set in a thin line. A body on land where there should be no body, and a bullet through the head. It didn't take a genius to work out that this person, whomever they had been, had not met a natural end. I'd stumbled onto another murder. I sighed before I could help myself. It just seemed so unfair. Ever since someone had tried to frame me for murder, I'd seen my business wobble. The unwelcome competition from a devious local florist had been a hard pill to swallow. She'd since packed up her shop and left the village for good. But even though I'd picked up her cancelled event bookings, things were still less than fantastic for the time of year. In spite of the real killer being found, suspicions hung around a place as small as Merrifield for a long time. It didn't help that the local police chief enjoyed treating me like I genuinely was a killer, even though I'd proven myself innocent time and time again. It wasn't my fault that I seemed to attract trouble, like Diggory to a steak unwisely left on the counter to rest for too long. And now here I was with what was undoubtedly more trouble dumped on my doorstep. I spared a thought for the owner of the skeleton and his or her fate. Then I returned to wallowing in self-pity. It was self-pity that meant the first call I made was not to the police, justifying it by telling myself these bones had clearly been here for years. They could wait another hour. I was also hoping for a distraction when it was time to face the music and the baseless accusations that would undoubtedly follow. I needed Fergus Robinson. I shook my head and stuck my hands on my hips, my mind drifting again to the ominous cloud that still seemed to hover over Merrifield. Fergus and I had recently stumbled on a highly secretive operation being carried out on a piece of land near to the village where we lived. While the situation had been brought under control and Merrifield was now situated next to a brand-new national park to be, the phrase, unfinished business, had never felt so right. A large and secretive organisation named ING Corp had been involved in everything that had happened at Crickley Marsh, and even though we'd signed a contract of silence, I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't over. Not least because their ex-employee and my ex-boyfriend George was still missing. Fergus and I had agreed to the non-disclosure agreement, but that had been for the marsh, not for the missing person. I knew there was the heavy implication that we should forget we ever heard the name ING Corp, but a man had vanished without an explanation. Even though he was far from my favourite person in the world, it didn't feel right to let this particular sleeping dog lie. Speaking of dogs who weren't sleeping but were actively sneaking up on the pile of bones, I was chasing Diggory around the field when Fergus arrived. I should have known that my curious dog wouldn't be able to keep his nose out of mischief for long. I'd only turned my back for an instant and he'd been in amongst the bones, seizing one and running away. I tried to train him for months, but when it came to important things, like tampering with evidence in what would surely turn out to be a murder investigation, Diggory was a hopeless case. I ran after him shouting, until I remembered from training that I wasn't supposed to show him I was excited, before shouting again when he looked like he was starting to chew the stolen bone. I have no idea how long Fergus stood with his hands on his hips watching the circus in front of him, but he was grinning from ear to ear when I finally noticed him. "I don't suppose I could trouble you to help at all?" I greeted him, managing some sarcasm in spite.